My fiancé ended our relationship just months before our wedding, all because his mom decided I wasn't good enough. I'll never forget the last thing she said to me. "You're nothing without my son. He can do so much better." I didn't argue. I just smiled and walked away. Now? She calls constantly, crying and begging me to take him back. Her son, now broke, miserable, and no longer under her spotlight. It's surreal even writing this. Just 3 months ago, I was finalizing the details for what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Brett and I had been together for 3 years. We met back in 2021, and within 6 months, we were inseparable. A year and a half later, we moved in together and started building our life. When I first met his parents, I thought things went okay. His dad, Walt, was quiet but polite. But his mom, Susan, sat through dinner with a forced smile while interrogating me about my background. She wasn't subtle. The moment I mentioned my dad worked construction and my mom was a school aide, I saw her expression shift, just for a second, before she quickly recovered. Brett told me not to worry. "She's just traditional," he said. "She comes from a family that puts value on certain connections, but I don't care about that stuff." And I believed him, because love makes you hopeful, sometimes blindly. When Brett proposed last year during a weekend at a cozy little B&B, I was overjoyed. We agreed on a modest wedding. We wanted to save for a house, but the moment we shared the news, Susan stepped in like it was her event. At first, her help seemed generous. She had vendor contacts and offered to take on tasks, especially since I worked long hours. But it didn't take long to realize she wasn't helping. She was taking over. The venue I adored? Too basic. The catering I wanted? Not right for our guests. The dress I loved? A little cheap looking, don't you think? Brett kept saying it was easier to let her have her way than argue, so I started compromising until it didn't feel like our wedding anymore. It felt like every decision chipped away at my joy until planning became a burden instead of a celebration. The breaking point came during dinner at their home a few months before the big day. Susan invited a couple of her friends over, and halfway through the evening it became clear I was on display. Her friends kept trading glances as I spoke. At one point, one of them casually asked, "Where did you summer as a child?" I laughed, assuming it was a joke. I told them our vacations were usually camping trips or visiting family in Ohio. Silence. No one laughed back. After dinner, while helping in the kitchen, Susan cornered me. She started off casual, talking about Brett's ex, Melissa. Apparently, Melissa came from a notable family with property in the Hamptons. Then Susan shifted gears. She said Brett had big plans for his future, and implied I might slow him down. I stood there, stunned. I asked her what she meant, and that's when she dropped the mask. She told me flat out that while I was nice enough, I wasn't the right kind of partner. That I didn't come from the right background. That I'd embarrass him in certain circles. That I wouldn't know how to host, connect, or fit in with the life he was meant for. I was speechless. When I finally told her she was being out of line, she just laughed. This smug, quiet laugh, and said my reaction only proved her point. I walked out and told Brett everything in the car. I was shaking, expecting him to be angry on my behalf, but instead he went silent. Said I might have misread her tone. That she was just concerned. That night we had our first real fight. Turns out Susan had been whispering doubts in his ear for months, telling him we weren't a good match, that I didn't belong in his world. And the worst part? He was starting to believe her. In the following weeks, everything changed. Brett got distant. He started working late, coming home with questions that never existed before, like whether our different upbringings would create problems if we had kids, or whether I'd feel out of place at his company functions. Everything finally blew up the night Susan invited us over for dinner, supposedly to clear the air. Brett begged me to come, swearing his mom wanted to apologize, and like a fool, I believed him. I showed up thinking maybe things could actually get better, but there was no apology, just a long, uncomfortable evening filled with subtle digs about my outfit, my table manners, even the way I spoke. At one point, Brett stepped outside to take a call, and Susan leaned across the table with this cold, calculated look in her eyes. She told me, without flinching, that I was nothing without her son, that he could do so much better, that if I really cared about him, I'd walk away before I dragged him down with my ordinary life. I was in shock, and when tears welled up in my eyes, she rolled hers, like my emotions just confirmed everything she believed about me. When Brett came back inside, I was already grabbing my things. He asked what happened, and Susan instantly shifted into performance mode. feigning concern and saying I'd misunderstood some friendly advice about the wedding. That was it. I was done. In the car, I told Brett exactly what had happened and gave him a choice. Either we go low contact with his mom until she learns how to respect me, or the wedding's off. I expected him to finally step up, but instead, he folded. He said maybe his mom had a point, that maybe we were rushing things, that we came from different worlds and love just might not be enough. The man who once promised none of that mattered was now echoing his mother's elitist nonsense. I didn't say another word. I took off the engagement ring, placed it on the dashboard, and asked him to drop me off at Angela's instead of going home. He didn't even argue, didn't even try to stop me. The next day, while he was at work, I packed what I could, left my key in a note, and walked away from the life I'd spent years building. I blocked his mom immediately. I left Brett unblocked, just in case he came to his senses. He didn't. A few days later, he sent a weak text saying he was confused and needed time to think. I replied that there wasn't anything left to think about. Either he was ready to build something based on respect, or he wasn't. His answer? Maybe we should take a break until my work project wraps up. Then we can reassess. That was all I needed to hear. 3 years together, and he couldn't even give me a real goodbye. He just wanted to keep me on the shelf while he figured out if I was still convenient. I told him not to contact me again. Apparently, he's been telling people we mutually agreed to call off the wedding because of different goals. Sure. Meanwhile, I've been focused on rebuilding my life. Just yesterday, I got a voicemail from Susan. No idea how she got my new number. She was crying, asking if we could talk about Brett. I didn't even finish listening. Deleted it. Whatever chaos they're dealing with now is no longer my concern. The wedding? It would have been next weekend. Instead, I booked myself a solo trip to a quiet beach rental I found online. Not exactly the honeymoon I had in mind, but maybe the fresh start I actually needed. Update. The first month was a blur. I stayed on Angela's pull-out couch way longer than I meant to. She's a saint, honestly. Every morning I'd wake up half reaching for Brett before reality came crashing back. I lost 10 pounds without even noticing. I stopped eating, barely slept. Angela started leaving protein bars around the apartment because I kept forgetting to feed myself. I'd scroll through rental listings for hours without calling anyone. It just felt too final. But Angela, being the quiet force she is, gently nudged me to check out a place in her friend's building. It wasn't fancy, just a tiny one-bedroom with barely enough room to turn around in the kitchen. But it was affordable and close to work. I signed the lease the same day. Moving in was rough. I'd left most of my stuff at Brett's place because I couldn't face organizing movers. Angela and her boyfriend helped me haul a mattress, a basic couch, a little table from IKEA. For a while, the apartment felt empty, like a shell of a life I hadn't fully stepped into. Work became my lifeline. I started arriving early, staying late, volunteering for anything extra, anything that kept me from coming home to silence. My team lead noticed and started giving me more responsibility. At least there, I felt useful, seen. Then about 2 months after the breakup, I ran into Nick, Brett's brother, at the grocery store. I'll finish that part next if you want it rephrased, too. Running into Nick, Brett's brother, was unexpectedly awkward, but also oddly validating. He told me he was sorry for everything that happened and admitted he'd argued with their mom over the way she treated me. I didn't expect that, and while it didn't change anything, it was the first time someone from Brett's world actually acknowledged that I'd been treated unfairly. He also let it slip, carefully, that things weren't exactly going great for Brett. I thanked him for the honesty but kept the conversation short. I wasn't ready to get pulled back into that mess, not even indirectly. Then about a week later, my college roommate invited me to a party. I almost skipped it, but Angela practically shoved me out the door, saying I needed to remember what life felt like outside survival mode. She was right, not that I'll ever say it to her face. That's where I met Matt. He was visiting from out of town, my roommate's cousin just passing through. We ended up in the same little group chatting about random stuff. At the end of the night, he asked for my number, and to my own surprise, I gave it. Our first date was low-key, coffee on a Sunday afternoon. Easy conversation, no pressure, and for the first time in months, I wasn't constantly comparing everything to Brett. Matt was grounded, lived in a regular apartment like mine, had a family that, as far as I could tell, didn't care about vacation homes or who your parents were connected to. When I gave him the short version of my breakup story, he just listened. No awkward advice, no look on the bright side speech, just presence. Around the 3-month mark post-breakup, something completely unexpected happened at work. My company started restructuring and created a new role on a fresh team. Apparently, all that extra time I'd been putting in hadn't gone unnoticed. My manager encouraged me to apply, even though she warned it'd mean more hours and higher stress. I almost didn't go for it. My confidence was still bruised. But honestly, I figured I had nothing left to lose. The interview process was intense. 3 rounds, presentations, late-night prep sessions. But 2 weeks later, I was called into my manager's office and offered the role. The promotion came with a raise big enough that I didn't have to stress about rent anymore. It wasn't life-changing money, but it gave me breathing room for the first time in what felt like forever. I was still processing that win when the universe decided to test me again. I ran into Rita. Yes, that Rita, Susan's gossip-loving friend, at the mall. I was shopping for some new work clothes, and she spotted me coming out of a store. She acted overly friendly, like we'd ever been more than polite strangers. After some small talk, she dropped what was clearly planned info. Brett had lost his job. Apparently, that big project, the one he used as an excuse to take a break, had gone sideways in a major way. Missed deadlines, poor management, and poof, he was let go. According to Rita, he'd been floundering ever since. She even mentioned that Melissa, the ex Susan adored, briefly gave him another chance after we broke up, but dumped him again a few weeks later. Rita smirked and said something about me dodging a bullet. I kept my expression neutral. But inside? Yeah, it definitely felt like a bullet had been dodged. The weirdness didn't stop there. A few days later, I was having dinner with Matt at a new restaurant downtown when I spotted Susan. She was across the room with Walt and another couple I didn't recognize. Our eyes met. I looked away fast, heart racing. I expected her to pretend I didn't exist, or maybe give me that signature frosty glare. Instead, she walked over. Walt looked mortified, but she greeted me like we were old friends. Told me I looked wonderful, asked how work was going. Somehow she knew about the promotion, and even complimented my outfit. Matt gave me a confused look as I awkwardly introduced them. When she realized Matt and I were on a date, her smile tightened, just slightly, but she kept up the act. Before leaving, she said everyone misses me and hoped we could catch up sometime. I gave a polite but vague response, and she finally walked away. Matt was chill about the whole thing, but did say she seemed intense, which honestly was putting it very mildly. About a week later, Angela forwarded me a Facebook message. It was from Brett. He'd reached out to ask how I was doing and whether I was seeing anyone. Angela didn't respond because she knew I wouldn't want her sharing anything. I thanked her for having my back, but the message unsettled me. I started hearing more through mutual friends. After losing his job, Brett had moved back in with his parents. He was still figuring things out. And that future his mom thought I didn't belong in? Turns out, it didn't quite go according to plan. The life Susan had once so carefully mapped out for Brett was unraveling fast. And from what I heard through mutual contacts, she wasn't taking it well. I tried not to dwell on it. My life was moving forward. My relationship with Matt was growing steadily. No pressure, no drama, just something genuine. We'd been seeing each other for about 2 months, taking things slowly. He started helping me turn my little apartment into something that actually felt like home. One weekend we put up shelves for my books. The next, we hung some artwork. It was simple, but those small changes made the place feel less like a temporary escape and more like mine. Work was tough, but rewarding. Some nights I came home completely drained, wondering if I was really cut out for the new role. But overall, I was proud. My team respected me. I was finally beginning to believe that I deserved to be there. Then last Friday, everything shifted again. I was walking to my car after work when I noticed a voicemail from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But something told me to hit play. It was Susan. Her voice was trembling. She said she'd been trying to reach me, that she needed to talk about Brett, that he wasn't doing well, that she'd made a huge mistake and would do anything to make things right. 6 months ago, this woman said I was nothing without her son. Now she was begging me to help him. I didn't respond. Instead, I went to Matt's like we'd planned, but I couldn't shake the message. It played in my head the whole evening. Matt picked up on it. He didn't push. He just asked what I wanted. What would bring me peace? The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls. Another text, different number. I figured it was Brett's new phone. I didn't open it, but I finally gave in to curiosity and texted back. Just one simple message. What's going on? Safer than a call. easier to ignore if needed. Within 5 minutes, my phone rang. It was Susan. Again. She'd been using Brett's phone since I'd blocked her. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. That was mistake number 1. She didn't sound like the composed, judgmental woman I remembered. Her voice shook. She asked how I was, said I looked great when she saw me at the restaurant, which was somehow both creepy and calculated, and then launched into the most uncomfortable apology I've ever received. She admitted she'd been horrible to me, that she misjudged me because of shallow assumptions, that she regretted driving me away. I sat there, just listening, as she painted a picture of Brett's collapse, how he lost control after our breakup, how he spiraled, the drinking, the financial mess, the hopelessness. When I finally asked why she was telling me all this, her answer made my stomach twist. She said Brett needed help, that I had been a stabilizing force, that I was what he needed now. The same woman who once said I wasn't worthy of her son was now begging me to help fix him. The audacity was unreal. I told her as gently as I could that I was sorry Brett was struggling, but we had been over for months. And I was seeing someone else. She didn't even flinch. She waved it off, said rebound relationships never lasted, said Brett and I had real history, then asked if we could meet in person, for coffee, just to talk. Matt wasn't thrilled when I told him. Honestly, I wasn't sure why I agreed. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I needed to see how far this woman had fallen to come crawling back to the girl she once dismissed. That weekend, I walked into the cafe and saw her already seated, and I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the flawless, perfectly styled woman from before. Her hair was thrown up in a rushed ponytail, makeup barely there. She looked tired and, strangely, human. She had already ordered my favorite drink. That detail unsettled me, because it meant Brett had clearly talked about me, recently. The next hour was surreal. She walked me through every part of Brett's unraveling. After losing his job, he tried to keep up appearances. Same lifestyle, same attitude. But it all fell apart. Debt piled up. He burned bridges. He retreated inward. She described a version of him that I didn't even recognize. Isolated, angry, hopeless. I listened. Quietly. Until she circled back to me again. She said she still believed I was the one person who could bring him back. That Brett needed someone steady in his life. Someone like me. And all I could think was, she still doesn't get it. I'm not here to save him. I'm not his backup plan. And I'm definitely not some bandage for mistakes he made without me. When she finally stopped talking, I told her the truth. I'm not angry anymore. I've moved on. I've worked hard to rebuild the life her son, and she, tried to convince me I didn't belong in. Then I stood up, said goodbye, and walked out. No scene, no drama, just done. After Brett lost his job, things spiraled fast. He burned through his savings trying to keep up appearances, poured money into a friend's doomed startup, maxed out 2 credit cards, and ended up right back where he started, living in his childhood bedroom, sleeping in until noon, barely applying for anything. During that coffee shop conversation, I kept expecting Susan to come right out and ask me to take him back. But instead, she took a more manipulative route. She kept saying things like, he was always his best self with you, or you were the one person who could really motivate him. She even added, he listens to you in ways he never listens to me. When I reminded her that she once made it very clear I wasn't good enough for her son, she got teary-eyed and said she'd just been trying to protect him from the wrong things. That maybe she should have valued my steadiness more than Melissa's connections. I almost laughed. Steady? That was her new spin. Suddenly I was responsible, not boring, reliable, not uninspired. It was transparent and a little pathetic. I left that meeting feeling hollow. I'd expected to feel vindicated, but what I mostly felt was pity, with a side of residual anger. I told her I'd think about talking to Brett. No promises. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The calls started the very next day. At first, Susan just followed up. Just checking in after our talk. Then it was, Brett asked about you. Then it escalated. There's an opening at a place he might be a fit. Is your company hiring? Every day brought a new voicemail, and the messages kept getting more desperate. She told me Brett's father was threatening to cut him off financially if he didn't get it together. That family friends were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. She even mentioned my parents, saying she wanted to make amends with them too. Then I got a text from Nick, Brett's brother. He apologized for Susan's behavior and told me that what I'd heard barely scratched the surface. Apparently, Brett had been drinking heavily after our breakup, and that played a big role in his downward spiral at work. Nick said Susan was blaming herself for pushing me away, seeing that moment as the turning point in Brett's life. But he also made one thing very clear: Brett made his own choices, and I was under no obligation to fix any of it. I really appreciated that someone in that family finally understood that none of this was mine to carry. Meanwhile, things with Matt were only getting better. He never pushed, never judged, just quietly supported me through all of this. We'd even started talking about the possibility of moving in together when his lease was up. The contrast between the peace I had with him and the storm brewing around Brett's family was undeniable. And then Susan crossed the line. It was 2 weeks after our coffee meeting. I was walking to my car after work when I saw her waiting in the parking lot. My heart sank. That was not okay. She rushed up to me, visibly frantic, clutching a folder, Brett's resume. She asked if I could pass it along to someone at my company. I was stunned, furious. I told her firmly that this was inappropriate, that she needed to stop contacting me. Right there in the parking lot, her face crumpled. She burst into tears, saying she didn't know what else to do. That Brett wouldn't listen to her, that she was desperate. A few of my coworkers witnessed the whole scene. It was humiliating. I walked her over to a bench away from the main entrance and, as calmly as I could, told her the truth. I couldn't help her. I couldn't help Brett. Our relationship was over, and she needed to respect that. She eventually left. But for the rest of the week, I got side eyes from coworkers who had seen it all unfold. Angela, who works at the same company, got bombarded with questions. Who was that crying woman in the parking lot? It was maddening. And then, finally, Brett reached out. He sent a long text. He apologized for his mother's behavior, for how things ended between us. He admitted he'd made a huge mistake by not standing up for us when it mattered. Said he missed me every single day but had been too ashamed to say it sooner. And here's the thing. When I read that message, I felt nothing. No pain. No spark. No curiosity about what if. Just peace. I didn't feel satisfaction reading Brett's message. Just exhaustion. And, weirdly, peace. Like I'd finally reached the end of something. I showed it to Matt. He read it quietly, didn't offer opinions, just gave me space. I told myself I'd respond when I was ready. But Susan didn't give me that chance. The very next morning, she called again. Asked if I'd read Brett's message. Wanted to know what I thought. I told her gently but firmly that it wasn't her place to involve herself in our communication. That's when she got defensive. Insisted she was just trying to help. And something in me snapped. In the calmest voice I've ever used, I told her this would be the last call. That I was blocking her number. That if she showed up at my workplace again, I would treat it as harassment. I reminded her that Brett was an adult, and if he wanted to fix things, it had to come from him, not from the person who caused so many of the problems in the first place. Before I hung up, I added one last thing. Maybe if she'd taught her son to value people for who they are, rather than what they come from, we wouldn't be here. That night, I finally replied to Brett. I told him I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger. But I made it clear, there was no going back. I had moved on. I suggested he get help, for his drinking, for the gambling, for the guilt. I told him it was time to stop letting his mother fight battles that were his alone to face. I wished him peace and asked him not to contact me again. Then I blocked them both. It felt like closing a door that had been cracked open for far too long, but it wasn't over. Not quite. The next morning, I got a direct message on Instagram, a new account. No name, just a picture of a flower. It was Susan. This time she was angry. She accused me of being cold, of abandoning Brett when he needed me most. She said I was throwing away everything we had out of pride. That part almost made me laugh. Susan lecturing me about pride? I blocked the account without replying. But then came emails, from new addresses. A handwritten letter, delivered to my apartment. Each message more desperate than the last. The final straw came last weekend. Matt and I were having dinner at my place when there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there was Brett. He looked worn down, tired, clearly not sober. And right behind him, hovering with anxious energy, was Susan. For a few seconds, I just stared. Couldn't speak. Matt came up behind me and asked who it was, and the look on Brett's face when he realized I wasn't alone. It was heartbreaking, but not in the way it once would have been. Brett tried to talk about our past, about his regrets. Susan kept chiming in about how good we were together. I didn't invite them in. Instead, I stepped into the hallway, closing the door most of the way behind me, and I told them, gently but clearly, that this wasn't okay. That showing up at my home crossed a serious line. That I meant every word I'd said in my message. And then, for the first time, Brett surprised me. He turned to Susan and said, "This is why I didn't want to come. I told you this would only make things worse." Then he looked at me and apologized. Not for the breakup, but for not protecting me from her. Not then, and not now. 5 days have passed since that moment. I haven't heard from either of them. Nick texted me once. Said Brett went to his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I thanked him, but didn't ask for updates. Matt and I are planning a weekend getaway. A real one. No drama. Just space to breathe. I've changed my email. Let my manager know to keep an eye out for any unexpected visitors. Life goes on. And surprisingly, it's better than I could have imagined a year ago, back when I was planning a wedding to the wrong person. I don't know if I'll need to post another update, but I do know this. Sometimes the hardest thing you ever walk away from is exactly what saves you.